Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending the CCIDM Expert Speaker Series event. Our speaker is Mario Xavier Carrasco. Mario is a co-founder and principal at ThinkNow, which is an award-winning technology-driven cultural insights agency based in Burbank, California. He's a trendsetter and influencer. He posts often on LinkedIn and has a large following in the market research community. Mario has been vocal about diversity and multicultural approach and has been serving on the editorial review board of the Journal of Cultural Marketing Strategy. He's also a founding editor, a founding partner for Insights in Color, an initiative built for multicultural research and insights professionals rooted in radical disruption. Further, under his co-leadership, ThinkNow has successfully launched several innovative initiatives, including ThinkNow Connect, a segmentation solution focused on multicultural market, and DiagoUGain.com, one of the largest and most representative Hispanic online panels in the industry. During his 9-year tenure at ThinkNow, Mario's expert knowledge of multicultural consumers and his passion for unveiling the story behind the numbers is evident in his editorial contributions to Forbes, eMarketer, Quarks Magazine, Online Market Research Magazine, and Media Post. Mario has been recognized for his accomplishments. Under his leadership, ThinkNow was named to the Inc.'s 5,000 list of fastest growing companies in 2018 and 2019. Mario was named the Next Gen Market Research 2018 Industry Change Agent of the Year, and in 2017 received the SBA Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. He's also an SBA Emerging Leader recipient. Mario is a Stanford Latino Entrepreneur Institute graduate and USC Marshall School of Business alum. I'm so pleased to have him as our guest speaker today. Please also note that we are recording today's event and the video will be posted on our website. If you have any questions during his talk, feel free to post questions on the chat. The AMI and the e-board members will make sure that Mario has a chance to respond to your questions during the talk. And after his talk, we'll also have a Q&A time where you can ask questions directly. Without further ado, here is our guest speaker. So Mario, thanks so much.
Thank you for the intro. Let me share my screen here. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Thanks again for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you all. I've spoken a couple different times, and I think usually around trends. I think I've spoken on kind of emerging trends in the market research space. I've spoken on multicultural research specifically, but after talking to some of the students, afterwards, and also just kind of reflecting on my time in college, I wanted to give you also a little bit more concrete idea of the market research industry in terms of what kind of career options there are. I think it's a great career option. I think the fact that you all are showing up to this and are part of the market research group there at Cal Poly, shows initiative. So I wanted to kind of give you a high level overview of the type of positions. Some of you may already know this. Some of it might be new and might be using some nomenclature that you're not familiar with. So I would prefer to not speak the entire hour. So any questions that you have, please stop me at any time. We won't wait until the end. You can put it in the chat and Joseph will help me out, help me field that. So Dr. Jung was already kind enough to give an introduction to you, a little bit kind of my background, how I came to be a co-founder of ThinkNow and fall into market research. Pretty untraditional path to market research, although traditional in the sense that many people in the market research industry did not think that they would end up in market research. So you have people from various different types of background. I actually studied philosophy and literature in undergrad, and right after school had no idea what I was going to do with that degree. So I taught high school English while getting a master's in English. So it was a program that allowed me to teach full time and actually pay for my graduate degree. Found out quickly that I wasn't a good teacher, and transitioned from that. And so literally was Googling, what can you do with an English degree? And marketing popped up. And so at the time, this is early 2000s. There was kind of an increased awareness about multicultural audiences. The US Census in 2000 severely undercounted the amount of US Hispanics in the country. And so companies were scrambling to kind of figure out, how do we reach this consumer? And given my cultural background, Spanish, I'm bilingual, English and Spanish, had an English degree. I was able to get a job at a company called Hispanic Business Magazine, and kind of use my cultural background, language skills, and my writing skills to get into marketing. As I worked there and worked my way, I found that I was really passionate about data. Marketing, obviously, a big component of that, as you all know, is data, and got really interested in that once I was in that position. And through that job, I was exposed to a lot of different advertisers and was able to make connections at Microsoft, and transition to working for Microsoft. They're working in digital media, digital marketing, again, really analytics heavy. And ultimately transitioned my way to a firm called Garcia Research, founded by Carlos Garcia, who I think was a speaker previously for the Expert Series. So Carlos Garcia hired me to build out their online research division. It was one of the best places I ever worked at, and really owe a lot of my career to Carlos Garcia. He sold that company in 2011, and my business partner and I, who was my boss at the time at Garcia Research, decided not to go along for the purchase. We felt like there was a big opportunity to continue kind of on the mission that Carlos Garcia started, but then expand that, right? Because Garcia Research was really focused on US Hispanics, Latinos in the US. We saw demographic changing happening outside of that. You saw, the rise in Asian immigration, the rise in purchase power among Black Americans, and the increased need for companies to understand those consumers. So that's when we founded ThinkNow in 2011. And I actually went back to business school in 2018. After a long journey, kind of figuring out about what I was passionate about, I went back to USC and got a master's in entrepreneurship. I don't know if anyone has any questions about my background or anyone interested in entrepreneurship. Happy to answer questions regarding that as well. So wanted to start off first with the question, is market research right for you? Again, you all are way ahead in terms of myself and showing interest in the space. And honestly, you're ahead of many people in the industry, with the initiative that you have in the analytics, marketing, and insights club. But I think some questions to ask yourself and some things to consider. One is, are you curious? Market research is all about, in my opinion, about curiosity. And that's whether you're on the client side or the vendor side, and I'll talk to you more about that. But one of the hallmarks of being a good researcher, market researcher in general, is curiosity. You're going to have to address the business objectives, either for a company or a client, and getting into the mind of consumers, getting into the mind of business owners or whoever you're researching. It's really important to be curious about how things work, how products are made, how marketing may sound to somebody that's not of the same background as you, right? So I think curiosity is really a key element. Another thing I want to talk about is it's not necessarily about numbers. I think there's a perception that market research is all about numbers and quantitative, but there's a whole aspect, a large industry that's more about qualitative research, which there are number components to it, of course, but qualitative research really is about talking to people, understanding people. There's a variety of methodologies now, in-depth interviews, focus groups, and then with the advent of the internet, qualitative research has really exploded, and that's been accelerated by the pandemic. So now there's emerging methodologies of what we're doing now, right? Was being able to conduct a focus group via Zoom, being able to conduct an in-depth interview via FaceTime. Companies are becoming really innovative and creative now that we weren't able to be in focus room facilities. We weren't able to get people one-on-one. And to be honest, I don't think it's going to go back anytime soon, because companies can save money now by not leasing out big real estate places. And it's more convenient for the consumer, right? So if you want to get in the mind of a mother of 2 children and see what her day is like, it's going to be much easier to have her FaceTime you and walk you through, her purchase thinking in her kitchen, versus asking that person to take time out of their day and go to a focus group facility and ask questions. Another key component about market research is storytelling. That's something I'm personally passionate about, with my background and interest in literature. And even though I took an untraditional path to market research, I feel like my background in English and writing and storytelling has been really critical to my success. Numbers can only get you so far in terms of market research. At the end of the day, you're going to have to present those numbers either to your internal client or external clients. And how you talk about those numbers is just as critical as the data itself. I would argue that it's even probably more critical on how you present it. Executives are super busy. They don't have time to look at the really cool Excel or data table that you made. They want you to summarize, a survey of 5,000 people that had 30 questions and maybe 2 or 3 slides. And that's going to come down to your writing skills, your ability to look at numbers and make meaning make sense from a storytelling perspective, while aligning that with what the original business objectives are. Another thing to kind of ask yourself if you're considering a career in market research would be project management. I mean, I think this goes for any career really at this point, but project management, especially for market research, is really critical. Being organized, being able to stay on top of deadlines. Writing, that's one thing that I see kind of a shift. And as a business owner, I'm seeing that becoming an increased issue in new applicants, is like the ability to write for whatever reason. Anecdotally, from my perspective, has been declining. So if you can focus on your writing, making sure that you write concise, making sure you just have that ability. I think it's like anything else. If you're someone that's naturally good at writing, that's great. But I think there's people that think like if they're not naturally good at writing, they can't be good writers. But like with anything else, it just takes practice. So I would say, even if you're not necessarily looking for a job in market research, practice your writing. Given the competitive nature of the job market right now, someone that's able to write well is a really big competitive advantage. Then lastly, being open to new perspective, which I think is part and parcel with inclusivity, is especially critical in market research. So, I alluded to being able to put yourself in the shoes of a consumer that doesn't necessarily come from your background, is super important in market research. As you develop questionnaires, for example, making sure that it's easily accessible and understandable from people from different cultural backgrounds. Many of the people you're going to be researching don't necessarily have college degrees, right? So making sure that when you're putting together research, whether that's putting together a questionnaire, talking to focus group participants, you got to be open to new perspectives and open to looking at things in a different way. So I know I went through a lot there on my first slide. Does anybody have any questions about that or clarifications?
I guess I have a quick question on your background in the previous slide. I think you said you went back to USC for entrepreneurship. I was sort of interested what you do as in an entrepreneurship degree program.
Yeah. So I had a focus on innovation. So kind of learning about specifically how to launch new technology projects, so ironically, a big part of that was like consumer research, which is a little bit different for a startup or a company. So consumer research, technology commercialization, like how one thing is having an idea and creating a product. A whole other thing is coming up with how to commercialize it, how to sell it. So learning about that, learned a lot about venture capital and investing, business law, negotiation. So it's pretty similar to an MBA, but with some emphasis on innovation, commercialization, and fundraising.
Sure. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So here's a little bit kind of some nomenclature that maybe is familiar. This is by no means exhaustive. This is kind of from my perspective as a founder, as a vendor, kind of some of the different paths or ways that you can think about working in market research. So on a high level, I talked a little bit about quantitative versus qualitative. I think you all are familiar with the difference, right? Quantitative being primarily survey-based research with large samples. Qualitative being smaller focus group. Focus groups are typically no bigger than 7, 10 people on the large side. And then qualitative also has in-depth interviews or IDIs. So I think thinking about, just kind of reflect on your personal interests. Are you more interested in numbers, working with large samples and survey data? Or are you more interested in qualitative research? I think coming into the industry and having that in mind is going to help you make a decision, much more better informed decision in the types of companies and the types of roles that you're applying for. And within that, there's like almost infinite amount of different types of positions once you decide whether you want to go quantitative or qualitative. I put a couple examples of things like you would never even think about, right? That when you think about a career in market research, for example, survey programming, right? That is an entire industry unto itself, falls under quantitative. So if you're interested in market research, maybe you have an interest for programming, or you're already programming, or you have some sort of computer science or computer engineering background. Survey programming is highly in demand. So you can, combine any kind of multiple interests and likely find it within the market research field. On the other side of things, moderating is kind of the first position that you think about when you think about qualitative research. But again, there's all types of positions within qualitative research outside of moderating, like putting together the report, recruitment of individuals. So depending on your interest, but I think on a high level, first deciding whether you want to go into quantitative or qualitative research is an important distinction to make. Another thing to consider is whether you want to work on the client side. So client typically meaning a company, right? I think you've had probably some companies come and speak to you all. So, I mean, all of the Fortune 500 companies for sure have market research positions within them. The ones that come to mind are technology companies. We work a lot with technology companies. So Facebook, Snapchat, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, but there's also non-tech companies that have market research. I list some of them: financial institutions, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, CPG, consumer packaged good, Kellogg's, retail, Walmart, right? So kind of deciding, do you want to work with a client or vendors like companies like ThinkNow? I'll go into some of the pros and cons of working on each side of them, but that's something to consider as well as if you're considering a career in market research, and this will help you kind of apply to the companies that you're more interested in. Some other things to consider, I'm listing a couple of industries that fall into market research that people don't necessarily think of. UX, user experience, and user interface research. Is that something that you all discuss as part of the program, like UX UI research? Is it worth covering? Have you heard those terms before, Joseph?
I think I've heard those from like other tracks within my major, meaning like web design people. I guess it sort of relates to market research as well when you're trying to create like a website platform for, I don't know, clients, I guess, but
yeah,
I guess it's pretty cool.
Exactly. So user experience, user interface is kind of a hot job title now, right? User experience researcher, user interface researcher. They're using a lot of the fundamentals of market research, but like Joseph mentioned, applied in a technology perspective, right? So Facebook, a lot of it was popularized by social networks. So it's really market research focusing on optimizing certain actions, whether that's clicking, whether that's swiping, whether that's liking, right? These researchers tend to spend a lot of time in digital spaces, researching and understanding consumer behaviors online and optimizing for that. That's a whole other kind of discipline within market research. And if that's something of interest to you, I think there's some free online certifications that you can get. You're going to have a really great foundation. You likely don't even need those certifications if you're coming out, with a market research emphasis in your career. But that is, when you see those titles, UX, UI, just note that that is kind of falls under the umbrella of market research. And then lastly, the sample industry, which is really my background, has been my background for the past 15 years. And sample is a multi-billion-dollar industry unto itself. And essentially what sample is, the sample industry, is the procurement of people to take your surveys and the procurement of getting people to participate in your qualitative studies. And that industry ranges from recruiting people into a panel, right? A panel is a group of people that have agreed to take surveys on a regular basis. You've probably surfed the internet and seen, ads for take the survey for cash. That's a panel. Survey Monkey is like probably one of the most well-known companies. But the sample industry, there's a range of job opportunities available there as well that I think everybody should consider, because it's one of the industries that people rarely think about. But there's so many positions within the sample industry that if that's of interest to you, you should do research on. And any questions about any of this stuff here that I was talking about on the slide?
Hey, Mario. Yeah, actually, I have a question. Would you say within the market research industry, there's a more like in-demand role between quantitative and qualitative?
Wow, that's a really good question. Yeah, I would. I would say, like you're asking me right now in this particular point in time, I think there's a really big need for qualitative. We're seeing a huge resurgence in companies post-pandemic wanting to just speak to consumers, because there's such a big shift that happened and is happening in terms of how we purchase things, how we consume things, what we watch, that survey data alone is not really giving us a good picture. And companies have been seeing the need to get back to basics and speak one-on-one to consumers. And that has, our qualitative business has skyrocketed. And I can tell you that it's really difficult to find people working in that industry. Like, they're just all busy right now. And because it's not something that when people think about market research, they think about quantitative research, right? And because of that, it's not a well-marketed career choice. So I think, I think qualitative is really in demand right now.
Thank you so much.
That's a good segue. So a little bit into, I think I already explained this, so I'll go kind of quickly, but quantitative research dealing with numbers, statistics, qualitative research mainly dealing with words and meanings. That being said, there's qualitative components to quantitative, right? Somebody has to actually write the survey. I mean, that is qualitative in nature. And there's quantitative components to qualitative research. You somebody has to sit there, no matter how little people you spoke to, one person, and look at that data and put together a research report. Kind of on a high level, quantitative allows you to get a statistically significant base size and ask people a question and quantify that, right? Whereas qualitative allows you to explore concepts. So in our industry, kind of the ideal research project when you're talking to a client for the first time that's maybe exploring a business objective or a market that they've never researched before, the ideal project is starting with qualitative research, so a focus group, to just get an understanding of what you're researching, right? And sometimes you come in with a certain business objective or hypothesis, and you have a focus group, and it's totally different than what you initially came in with. So starting with qualitative research allows you to make hypothesis, but from actual conversations of your consumer. After you get that focus group, maybe you have an idea of some things that you want to explore. You then take those findings from a qualitative perspective and put it into a survey that allows you to then verify or not verify some of the hypotheses that you found in a focus group. So while I'm positioning kind of quantitative and qualitative as two different parts, many times qualitative and quantitative go hand in hand in our industry. And so if you're working in qualitative, you'll likely have to look at some quantitative reports and vice versa. Client and vendor, like I mentioned, clients being the end clients, so large Fortune 1000 companies that buy market research. And I tend to highlight those companies because the reality is that market research is expensive. It's very rare that you have small and medium-sized businesses purchasing market research. If market research is being done by a small company, it's usually they're doing it themselves on SurveyMonkey, right, and just writing a couple questions. But when I'm talking about market research, I'm talking about professionals that this is what they do for a living, and walk the client through every step. So some pros of working for the client side, like a technology company, like a Facebook, like a Walmart, you have industry specialization. So you're going to become an industry expert, right? If you're working for a company just doing retail market research, you're going to become an industry expert. And that opens up opportunities specific to that industry that allows you to move up. And typically speaking, I'm generalizing here, but the pay is typically more competitive on the client side of things. The cons, it can be tedious, right? If you're working for the same company, you're typically working on the same similar type of projects. So if you're somebody that thrives in a constantly evolving environment, it might not be good. That being said, there's people that thrive on doing similar projects and work. So it's not necessarily a con. And long hours, I think that's, I think long hours right now, unfortunately, is the case for both client and vendors. But talking to my colleagues on the client side of things, I know long hours is pretty typical on the client side. Randy, you had a question?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to your last slide, but I was curious if you have like a standard off-the-shelf way, or maybe like a philosophy for resolving disputes between quantitative and qualitative, right? So I guess like theoretically it's not supposed to be a problem because the way it's supposed to work is like we start by knowing nothing and we do some qualitative and then we do some quantitative, and the knowledge is kind of always evolving. So we should just kind of land where the qualitative lands. I mean, it doesn't work, right? Because it's people doing both of those things, and no one wants to be incorrect, right? And you know, I'm a quant person by background, so my, I guess, somewhat biased point of view. Everyone's biased but me, of course, but my somewhat biased point of view is, you know, sometimes we would see like the qual people, you know, like holding to ideas that are, like seem like contradicted by the quant, and like it kind of feels like we already constructed this study to test this one idea. It turned out to not pan out, and like we kind of know that like the qual is the small sample thing, so like some things are going to turn out, some things aren't. But it almost kind of felt like the qual people feel like there's something like magical about what they do, and because like they're talking to a person, that makes it like more representative, because they have like that physical kind of not necessarily physical, but like that, because it comes from actual conversation. It's somehow like magical knowledge that like is representative in a way that even like a representative sample isn't. So just curious if you've had those experiences, and if you've have a standard way of dealing with them.
Yeah. So I can't say that I have, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And we haven't, because as a vendor, as a full service market research vendor, we do both. I think the way that we look at about it, and this is very I guess the politically correct way to approach it is like there is truth in both approaches, right? So you as a so someone in a qual setting, talking to that one person in the focus group that had a vastly polar opposite opinion to what the quant results were that doesn't negate that person's opinion. Like that person's opinion is true. It's just that when you're working with companies, you can't base business decisions on one person's opinion. You got to go with the majority of people. So I mean, I think that shows the shortcomings of both methodologies. From a qualitative perspective, you're going to get rich, robust conversations, and maybe you'll have a whole focus group agree, but that isn't necessarily something you can hang your hat on. And then on the other side of things, from a quantitative perspective, you can have 70% of people, you know, like a certain marketing messaging, for example, that didn't bear out in the qualitative research, but there's going to be that 30% of people that didn't. And so I guess that's how I would hold those two seemingly contradictory results.
Right.
Yeah, so I think they're both valuable. I think with qualitative too, I mean, like I said, I think the ideal scenario is that you unearth hypotheses in a qualitative setting that you wouldn't necessarily have come up with if you were just jumped into putting a survey together.
Right.
You know? So yeah, so that's kind of the client side. The vendor side of things, and that's, you know, where ThinkNow falls. And I've been on both sides. Me personally, I enjoy being on the vendor side of things because I like being exposed to a range of different industries. That is a pro in my opinion. Maybe, and I'm realizing that this is a very subjective slide. So, but you know, on the vendor side of things, you get to work with a broad range of industry. on any given day, I could be on a call with, Snapchat and talking about, Gen Z advertising. And then in the afternoon, I'm talking about AARP and, caregivers, and then working with the County of LA on vaccine messaging. So you get, exposed to a variety of different type of work. You get to experiment in different areas. So like the conversation, Randy and I were having, I'm looking at qualitative videos, and you're also looking at quantitative surveys. The cons of that is that you got multiple projects going on, right? Typically on the client side of things, you're focused on one project, one product, and then you move on to the next. Vendor side of things, you have lots of things going on. And as a result, like there's high turnover in the vendor industry. So that's just something to be mindful of. I think there's more. I think overall, I can say that there's more job security on the client side of things versus the vendor side. But of course, there's some really large market research companies that don't necessarily have high turnover. Any questions or comments there?
The regarding work and life balance, that is affected vastly by the number of hours that they have to work. So are you sure that's the long hours, that's the characteristic of client as opposed to that's more characteristics of vendors?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is, yeah. And I would say it depends on the industry, and I'm generalizing a lot here, but like right now, the companies that are hiring a lot of people in market research are technology companies, and technology companies, as you know, they're notorious for long hours. And so that being said, that's not to say that there aren't vendors that have long hours. But I'm just talking kind of more broadly. I think there's less of a life work balance on the client side versus vendor.
Okay, thank you.
This is a little bit about kind of UX, UI research, which I would say is, someone asked me about quant versus qual. I think qual is really kind of in general, if you had to pick between the two, the hottest side or the most on demand. On the quantitative side, UX, UI research is really in demand. So, traditional user experience is studying user interactions. And UX was really kind of born out of design thinking, design research, right? I think popularized by IDEO, but now has kind of evolved into what I was talking about, like technology companies really trying to optimize the smallest of interactions with their, whether it be social networks or websites, to optimize for whatever they're trying to optimize for, whether that's purchase if you're Amazon, eyes on screen if you're Facebook or a social media company. So UX UI research is exploding in terms of importance and demand on the technology side of things. Online research sample. This is an industry, again, I wanted to expose you all to you all. There's some definitions here. I'll send the deck afterwards. I'm not going to read through all of it, but again, in a nutshell, it's the people that take your surveys, the people that participate in your research are called sample. And there's a whole industry dedicated to getting people to answer your surveys, right? Because many times as market researchers, we don't think about those people. We're just like, yeah, we're going to send out the survey and people are going to take it. You can imagine it's getting more and more difficult now as people are used to really quick experiences, right? 15, 20-second videos on TikTok. And now you're asking me to take a 15 to 20-minute survey. It's getting harder and harder to get people to take surveys. And so there's some really interesting innovations happening, not only on the sample side, but also the survey side of things. How do we make surveys more engaging? So things like gamification. And the online research sample world kind of deals with all of that. And so if that's something you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. It's a great industry. It's kind of niche in that there's not a lot of people in it, but it's an industry that's really that needs more people in it, because I would say it's a linchpin of market research. Because if you don't have people taking your surveys, we really don't have market research. And so it's an incredibly important side of the research side of things. Here's a little bit kind of a market research analyst, so you get an idea. I put it in this in here, and it's I would take it with a grain of salt, because this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, kind of give you a sense of what a market research analyst makes in the US with the type of degree. This is just one job title. So I would say there's hundreds of job titles in all of everything that I've been going over. But I just put this here because this is all that the BLS captures. The reason that I wanted to point it to is that the job outlook is very, very good for the market research industry. You can see 22% increase in demand in the next 10 years. So, it's a very good industry that you all are looking to get into. One of the kind of macro trends that are happening that are making a kind of a renaissance in market research is the demise of cookies. I don't know how familiar you all are with cookies, but essentially cookies are little snippets of code that are embedded in every online interaction that we have when you visit a website, whether that's on your phone, on your desktop, on your smart TV. Advertisers are picking up your behavior and putting that in what's called a cookie, and creating an identity based on your browsing habits. As you know, Apple has been big on getting into positioning themselves as a company that's privacy, and so doing away with cookies. And Google, the biggest kind of holder of cookies, is going to phase out third-party cookies in 2022. The reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is that now that cookies are going away, which has been the primary data point for digital marketers, right? That's how when you Google, I don't know, clothing on your phone, looking for jeans, you get it on your phone, and you get it on your laptop, and you get it at home, right? Like, it's all cookies. So then that goes away, and that's been the underpinning for a multi-billion-dollar industry. Marketers are now looking for other data sources. And so now they're looking to market research. They're looking to first-party data and surveys to fill in some of that gap of understanding that's going to be left once cookies go away completely by the end of this year. And so there's been a rise in what's called Restech, or research technology companies. We've had some huge acquisitions that, I don't think people are talking about, right? Because people are typically talk about social media acquisitions, very rarely do market research companies make it, but I wanted to show this isn't within the last 3 to 4 years, we've had multiple billion-dollar companies being purchased. So, I mean, Qualtrics, for example, based out of Utah, you're probably familiar with their survey software, were purchased for $8 billion, one of the biggest exits ever. Zendesk acquired SurveyMonkey. Cint acquired a company called Lucid here. These are all multi-billion-dollar companies that are being purchased because these companies now understand, as cookies go away, the first-party data that Qualtrics, SurveyMonkeys, Lucids of the world own are going to become more important. And so I'm just giving you a context. Like, I think the 22% that the BLS put out in terms of job growth is vastly conservative. I think there's going to be a real need for market research professionals to provide data.